Okay, perfect. I thought the microphone was broken for a sec. Okay, all right, let's get going. Hopefully you're all sitting down with a drink in hand. All right, so we'll do a quick intro. I'm just gonna warm you up. I'm gonna do like a really quick lightning talk, and then we'll have the main event. Tom over here, and after which you're free to stick around and network, and you can chat to others. If you're looking for a job, potentially you might find an employer. If you're an employer, you might find somebody who's an applicant. And actually, yeah, before I forget, so yeah, I'm from Cover Genius. We're a company which is here in this office. We're insurance tech startup here or scale up here in Sydney. We are hiring for one Vue.js mid-level developer. So if you are a person who is that kind of role, and also you're pretty good with APIs and maybe a little bit of backend, doesn't matter which framework, then you can come talk to me. And on this topic, is anybody else here looking for people to hire? Anybody that wants to say a few words if you're looking to hire someone? It's very strange. All right. Alternatively, you can always go and chat to Matt if you are a candidate. I'm sure he will have roles for you. Cool. All right. So yeah, I'm Max and I work unbelievably at this company. I'm just gonna do a quick talk. Before that talk, this is an initiative by me and some of my friends. So one thing that's really annoying is kind of trying to bring together the JavaScript community in Australia, right? Not even specifically Sydney, just like Australia in general. If you do know me, probably I do more backend development than front end. And yeah, there's such a thing as the Australia PHP server. It's really useful, for example, to arrange meetups, find speakers, organize conferences. Can also do job finding there, but the main thing is just to have community discussions and talk to your peers, to figure out what's happening in the industry. Maybe you're moving across cities and, let's say you want to move to Melbourne for some reason, can't imagine why, but let's imagine such a thing happens. Well, you'll have somebody to talk to, you'll have people to meet who can kind of give you the runs on what's happening in the industry there. So yeah, that's basically what it is. So invite all of you to join. It's completely free, completely open. It's not any kind of like a paid product or marketing or anything like that. It's purely for developers, JavaScript developers. If you're a front end, even if you're a back end, that's fine. Whatever framework you use, that's fine. It's just a community Discord. And you will also find QR codes on the pillars here if you haven't had time to scan that. So highly recommend you join, and join in the discussion. Something we're trying to build up from this month actually. So quite a new thing. And yeah, cool. So with that out of the way, Vue.js. So I'm just gonna do a really quick recap. It's a little bit Vue focused, but that's all right. There might be some interesting things for other developers. Yeah, so this is just a bit of an ecosystem update. Not much of anything else. It's a very interesting report. If you are a Vue developer, you may be interested to see what are the trends in that ecosystem. So it has everything from tech to employment, what kind of companies Vue developers work for, a whole bunch of things. It's a free report, so if you're interested, you can have a look. You can also just Google it. The ecosystem in general, so as you may or may not know, Vue is kind of like a new JavaScript build system ecosystem announced last year. It's kind of becoming more complete, still missing a few things. So it's not like 100% complete, but they're plugging in the holes as they go along. There's more packages written for Vue 3 compatibility. Upgrading Nuxt has become easier than ever as well. And then on a kind of like an unrelated topic, yeah, there's a lot more solutions for UI components. So one of the things I found interesting is just how many companies were sponsoring this conference. And all they do is basically they just work on component libraries and templates, which is interesting. I didn't think that was like such a profitable business, but apparently it is. But I remember a few years ago, it was hard to find like a really good component library and really good templates. But yeah, now there's quite a lot of companies in this space. So if you're starting a new project, definitely have a look at your options. You may be surprised. Pinea, or Pina rather, I can never pronounce it. So Pini is like the new state management. It's essentially like the next version of UX, but it's been completely rewritten. So they just gave it a different name. Most developers have made the switch to it. It has a really simple API and TypeScript integration, which is one of the things that was lacking in Vuex and Vue 2. And yeah, it seems like one trend that I see as well, there's quite a lot of, let's say, meta framework or library authors that are putting a lot of effort into improving data stores, reactivity with data stores, and also caching that data from the API. So like the convergence of all of these things, doesn't matter what, like who the people are, whether it's Pinia, whether it's Nuxt, and I'm sure the same thing is happening in React, but it seems like there's a lot of effort being put to improve the developer experience of just interacting with APIs for the sake of data and storing it in store management. So it's very interesting, but that seems like a really trendy thing to do right now. Alien signals, who here is familiar with signals as a paradigm? Yep, it's one person. Okay, so yeah, most frameworks used to use something like proxying for reactivity, like for example Vue. But yeah, there's something called signals, which is actually a lot faster. The reason why it hasn't been popular is that it's also a little bit flaky, so it's very challenging from a framework perspective to develop correctly. But there has been a package for Vue called Alien Signals, which was tested in this thing called Vapor. And now in the latest Vue, they're kind of moving towards using it by default. Not everywhere, but they're beginning to use it by default in some parts of the framework, which is very interesting. I think it was started by, I want to say Solid.js. I hope I'm not making that up. But it seems like more and more frameworks are switching to it. So Svelte also announced they're going to be switching to it. I think everybody's kind of watching React and what's going to happen. Are they going to switch to use signals, or are they just going to continue with the current approach? But that's something that's probably going to be a big trend for the rest of this year. Composition API. So yeah, don't want to spend too much time on this, but yeah, basically, if you are a Vue developer, I hope you've transitioned to Composition API. Everybody seems to be moving away from Options API, and yeah, that's probably all I'm going to say on that. Don't really want to dwell on that. If you do have a, this is kind of interesting because we're in this position now, but if you have a major upgrade of your front end, or maybe if you're rolling out like a major feature, there's many different use cases. Yeah, it's very difficult to roll it out to production in such a way that you don't break your website, right? So there's probably two different approaches, which is do it in like layers or tiles. You know, different frameworks have different definitions for this, but basically you do a piecemeal approach. Another option, if you do have that option, is essentially run two versions of your front end in parallel. So this is actually something we're doing now, or we're setting up now. Obviously, it comes with the con that it's kind of like transparent to the user. So if you have, if your users are not particularly text heavy, there's a lot of them. It might be very difficult to get this going, but anyway, it is an option that's relatively simple. Seems to be a copy of that slide. Never mind. Okay, so Nuxt 4 is coming out really, really soon. Something I've been saying for like almost a year now. It is blocked entirely by Nitro server, nothing else. On that topic, yeah, Nuxt Commerce. So really interesting. It's a new kind of high performance, again, server-side rendered e-commerce starter kit. It's built with Nuxt, and it has a Shopify integration, right? So you can have this kind of front end on top of your Shopify store built with Nuxt, which is pretty interesting, pretty low effort to get going. And once again, a lot of templates, a lot of components available. Nuxt UI 3. So again, I think that's a component library as well. It's just the new version released recently. And then, yeah, Next DevTools too. Cool. Lastly, the future of Vue. So this is kind of more of an ecosystem thing again. So Vue is kind of being adopted by more and more different frameworks. They're going to have the first ever conference in Amsterdam in October. It's quite interesting. Didn't think there could be a conference for a build system, but apparently they can. But yeah, it highlights the kind of the growing importance and adoption of Vite in the front-end world. If you're not familiar, Void Zero is kind of like the company behind Vite, and it's the company that Avenue created, raised some capital. I think it's like $5 million, something like that. But yeah, essentially the concept is to have a unified high-performance JavaScript toolchain. It integrates parsers, linters, bundlers, test runners, and yeah, the aim is to boost developer productivity and in general to kind of rewrite everything in Rust seemingly, so it's blazingly fast. So if you're not familiar with Vite, you haven't tried it, maybe have a look. It's quite good. Community strength, yeah. So community is a really big thing in the Vue ecosystem for sure. Community feedback is a very strong loop and shapes the future of the framework. And yeah, in essence, things are kind of becoming a little bit more mature. People are moving towards the newer solutions like Vite, Pinia. Vue 3 obviously is becoming more mature. Most businesses have migrated. And yeah, I think it's kind of looking a little bit good. I like stability. I like it when it's certain. So that's kind of what it's looking like. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So a very, very short talk. Thank you very much. And we'll get Tom. Where is he? It's just, yeah, there he is. Come up. So Tom is gonna, yeah, thank you very much. And you have maybe 1 minute if you want to grab a drink before Tom sets up here. Probably 2 minutes, but no more. Where did I? Oh, yeah, you got it. Okay. Yeah. And just speak really closely into the microphone. Is my advice. You move your head, move the microphone with your head.
We'll let the stragglers get their beers. Does anyone remember these? Little keypad phones, got T9. Anyone know how to type on T9 still? Probably not. Who had them? Who had a phone with a T9? Yep, okay. Like half? I'm kind of impressed more didn't have these. No one had like the what was the Australian version? I had the Moto Razor in the US. I had a phone that barely had a screen. Yeah, like this. Yeah, okay. All right, well, this is gonna be a throwback for you guys who've had one of these phones. Yeah, so the two that I got here, they have 4G. This one actually has Wi-Fi, which is pretty crazy. Bluetooth, all sorts of fun stuff. And they are very much not dead, or at least that's what I'm gonna try to convince you today. So yeah, a little bit about myself, because you're probably like, who's this random guy here who obviously doesn't have an Australian accent? My name is Tom, so I'm from the US, originally from Boston, currently working for a company that makes an app store for flip phones. I started out working in flip phones about 5 years ago. I made an app called PodLP. It's a podcast app. It was more successful than I thought. It was a pandemic project that turned out to get 10 million installs in my first year. There was much more demand for it than I would have imagined. Also far less competition, which made it a lot easier to be successful. Yeah, and that's really how I got started, right around 2020. Like a lot of people, I was bored, I was at home, I had more time than I knew what to do with, and I couldn't go outside or do the things I wanted to do, so I made an app for flip phones. And before that, I've been working, as many people in tech do, a lot of the companies, most recently Facebook or Meta, Amazon, worked at a few smaller companies, and I probably built with every tool that they offer you. Facebook's a PHP shop for folks who don't know, or Hack, it's like their forked version of the language. Amazon's all Java, but we also had a Ruby on Rails monolith, JavaScript for all the front end, and who knows how many frameworks at this point. It probably touched Vue, React, Svelte, what was the other one? Marionette and Backbone. That was awful. I hope I never see those again. Yeah, Docker, all the AWS services. And yeah, for the past, I guess, almost a year now, I've been roughly nomadic. I spent 6 months in New Zealand before coming here. Was surprised at the stark contrast. For instance, there's probably more front-end developers here than exist in New Zealand. Yeah, and here's a bunch of links there. So I think the very first thing I'm here to convince you is that flip phones are, in fact, still a thing. Shortly, put very briefly, we got like 200 million of these sold every year. It's actually probably closer to 220 or 230. That is almost exactly the same number of iPhones that are sold every year. So I think, it depends on which year we're talking about. They kind of trade places, but we're very close to parity in terms of the number of people buying iPhones and flip phones. That includes a broad range of flip phones, as I'll tell you a little bit more about. There's actually quite an offering here. And then the prices also range. So doing a little bit of currency conversion, the absolute cheapest phone that I can see that we sell today without subsidies is 18 Australian dollars. That's before carrier incentives. So with incentives, we can get that down to probably like 10. And the most expensive that I've seen, without going to like the weird niche devices that mostly target rich Westerners who want shiny, metal boxes, is probably about $60 for like a normal-ish flip phone. And I think the big question a lot of people ask is why are they still a thing, and why now? Why would you care in 2025 about flip phones? So the big thing is that actually Australia's really led the way in this. I had to look this up. You don't have 2G or 3G anymore. You guys shut down 3G last year in 2024, which, like, kudos to you. So many countries have not figured out how to do that yet. In fact, most can't figure that out. And a big reason why is this. In countries like Bangladesh, there's almost 45 million people who use 2G every day, and 2G only phones to connect to SMS, make phone calls, and access GPRS basic data services. That's obviously not the case here, but that's just one country. And if you take that across the whole world, if you were to just shut off 2G and 3G today, you'd probably cut off 500 million people from accessing any form of connected device. So telcos like Viettel, for instance, Vietnam's main telco company, they're offering incentives, including they're doing a pilot program with 700,000 free 4G feature phones. It's literally just ones like this. They have different designs, they have different names, different language inputs, but it's a flip phone or a candy bar phone. And they have 4G now. And so they put an incentive package together of over $20 million to try to get as many people as possible off of 2G so they can eventually turn it off. I kind of hinted at this, but who uses them today, right? So there's 200 million plus units sold. Where are they being sold to? The vast majority are going to South Asia and Africa. So India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, the whole subcontinent makes up the lion's share of users today. And then Africa's not too far behind as a whole continent. Obviously, it varies depending on what part of Africa you're talking about. And there's a variety of reasons that people keep these devices. Affordability is key. Again, $12, $18 for a phone like this. The cheapest smartphone is probably around 6 times that price. And we're talking like an overstock Android Go phone from 2018. Not a nice phone that is actually very usable. Durability is another one. You talked about holding up the building, right, with a Nokia phone. I could do a demo. I could probably throw this across the room, but I don't want to hit anyone. It would be fine. Much better than your iPhone would do. So durability is a big one. Battery life, again, like you've probably seen before, you could pull up that Nokia from your drawer if you still have it, and I bet you'd still get battery life. My iPhone doesn't make it to the end of the day. And then low theft value is kind of one I hadn't thought about, but a lot of people carry them as second devices because if your smartphone gets stolen, people won't touch your flip phone, and you still have the ability to call or text somebody to get help. And they're growing in the West, mostly among digital detoxers or people who want to get off Facebook and social media, senior citizens and children, parents who want to give their kids a device for emergency contact, but they don't want them getting stuck down the rabbit hole of endless doom scrolling. So here's a comparison of some of the Nokias you've probably seen from yesteryear and then one that was shipped last year, the Nokia 235 4G. So they do reboots of all the ones that you've probably seen before. These are some of the specs they have now. So it's roughly the same phone. And in many ways, they even run the same software. But now they've got a 4G antenna with Cat1, so about 10 megabits per second. They've got Bluetooth, a bigger screen, USB-C now. Still have a headphone jack and a and a battery that is, I think, 1500 milliamp hours is my iPhone 13 minis, just under 2000. So it's like 3/4 the battery for a phone with 1/100th the power. So it will obviously last you a lot longer. And it runs TikTok. Yeah, that's where we're about to get to. So I'm working for a company right now called Cloudphone, and they make a product that is basically an app store for flip phones. So this is really what it looks like here. The user starts on their home screen. This is the operating system home screen, and they have a bunch of apps, right? The camera, the messages, etc. And then there's an app called Cloudphone. They click that, and as long as they have an internet connection, it will connect them to this portal here, where they're going to have access to apps with categories, a pin section for their favorites, and they've got things like BBC News, yes, social media, ironically, like TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and then a whole plethora of other content. And all of this is web. So everything you're seeing here, this is web, this is the website, this is just bbc.com. There's really nothing special here. And that's why it's relevant to Frontenders, right? Is that now you can build apps way easier for flip phones using web technology. Because this app, the Cloudphone app, is written in C++ and some sort of esoteric RTOS that it has to be compiled into the firmware. You can't ship updates. There's a whole bunch of reasons why actually making an app for a flip phone. We didn't really talk about the specs here, but on the low end, these phones have 16 megabytes of RAM and like a 500 megahertz CPU, single core. That's not a lot. I don't know if anyone's built an app in Node. You probably like fetched a JSON file that wouldn't have fit that into memory. I did when I built my podcast app. I certainly ran into issues with RSS feeds that were multi-megabyte. And so this is why when we talk about the technology that backs this, why this is so novel. So I don't know the live demo. I mean, I could give you a live demo, but there's too many of you, so thought I would just show you so you can see it in action here. And that's this phone. Not a touchscreen, correct. Keypad. Yeah, that's this one that I've got here. Of course, Mr. Beast would be one of the first things that you get to on the internet. So you get the idea. Basically, websites will work, web apps will work. Pretty much anything that's web will work here. So the technology that makes all this possible is a remote browser. Basically, Chrome lives in a server somewhere and sends a compressed representation of the website down to the phone. There's no real browser on the phone, right? The phone is not downloading HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm sure your React payload is too much to fit into memory for these phones. So that's why we have a server here. And then you have a thin client on the device that is basically like a VNC window. It basically just renders a vector representation of the screen. It will play the audio, the video, whatever you send it. But this is what you would care about here as a web developer. This is a standard browser. It's Chrome. It lives in a server. It makes HTTP requests to your website. It fetches all the resources. It supports a lot of the standards that you'd expect today. So if you're networking, XHR and fetch, I think it's running Chrome 128. So you get all sorts of stuff, right? WebSockets. I think even web transport's there now, beacons, WebGL, like all the cool stuff that you get in the browser, and it can all render to that phone. An obvious question would be why bother building for these phones, especially when you consider the demographic. They're not exactly very lucrative. So even though the same number of flip phones sell as iPhones, you're probably not going to charge $9.99 a month to this demographic when their phone was $10. They probably can't afford that. But there's a few reasons. I think one is ease of development. If you have a web app, it may just work, right? You may have to do very little. If you're already doing responsive design, you might just be able to ship it on these phones without making any changes, or very few. So ease of development is a big one. You're not dealing with building an entire new product to run on a platform that's niche. They're not learning any new programming languages, no new frameworks. The second would be less competition. Again, my podcast app, and I've gotten over 10 million installs because I was the first one, right? There was no one else there. And that's a pretty basic app to have. A lot of people ask why I don't publish on Android or iOS, and that's because there's probably like 1,000 apps for them, maybe even more. Why, it's just so hard to stand out. So all of those were organic. My very first day publishing in India, I had 250,000 installs, all organic. If you shipped an Android app, and I started in Android since the very early days of Android 2.0, odds are you're going to be paying like $1,000 to get any appreciable number of users on your app. Emerging markets, if you care about serving users in countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, South Africa, then it's worth considering a platform like this. And then having an impact is a pretty big one. A lot of ed tech startups do something in this, fintech. You can serve users who really need this rather than, the average Aussie who probably has 15 different banks that they could choose from and 100 different streaming services. So you could really be the first. And then brand introduction is a big one. A lot of these users will one day upgrade to a smartphone, and if you get your app in front of them, they're going to know what it is, and they're going to ask for it when they get their first Android phone. Most of this we already touched on, but yeah, how would you build an app for a service like CloudPhone? It's basically like building a PWA. In many ways, it's actually easier. So all the technology that you use today, any framework that you're using, all you need is a URL, and then you can sign up with the dev console, and you can test it out. It's pretty much that straightforward. And then what are the key things that you need to do to actually adapt here? So let's say you know nothing about flip phones, you've got an app somewhere and you want to figure out, how could I bring it to this device? The most obvious is it needs to fit small screens. I'll put this in the context here. This is a big version of a phone. This has a 2.4-inch screen and QVGA, that's 240 by 320. If anyone has an Apple Watch, your Apple Watch has probably about 50% more pixels than the screen in 1/2 the size. So these are low resolution, low contrast, small screens. It's hard to fit a lot on them. So you can't take a desktop app and then just 100% width and call it a day. You got to do some work to shrink it a little bit. The second is keyboard navigation. Again, I think you asked, do they have touchscreens? They do not right now. So you've got to handle D-pad. If you're doing accessible keyboard navigation, you should already have that out of the box. If you've never thought about keyboard navigation, then that's a whole other conversation. And then online only, that's an important one for CloudPhone specifically, because we require the servers to do all the powerful rendering. The user can't access your app unless they already have an internet connection. So you could take this as a pro or a con, right? As a con, your app can't work offline. On the plus side, you don't have to worry about making your app work offline. And then if you're building a PWA, how does it compare? The gist, a lot of it is the same, but it's actually quite simple. It's actually simpler. So because there's no offline support, service workers are not needed. You also don't need a web manifest. Most of that information to be discarded. There's no install prompts because the user can't quote unquote install the app since it can only be used online. So you can't ask them to install it. And there's no persistent cache. And what that means is if the user comes to your app, there is persistent data storage. So you've got local storage, you've got IndexedDB, all the stuff you're familiar with. But if you're using the caches API, the next time the user starts a new session in CloudPhone, that cache is gone. So they're going to fetch all the resources again fresh. This means that it's really easy to update. So you roll out an update on the URL for your app, and it's live. The downside is you have to handle caching server side. Otherwise, as everybody knows, one of the 3 hard problems in CS is cache invalidation. And if you want to get started, there's a couple ways that you can do this. Devices here, because they're quite affordable, they're very easy to buy and test with. It's way easier than buying the latest iPhone model, a lot cheaper too. But you can also test online. So we have a simulator on the CloudPhone dev console. You can fire up the simulator and it's actually running the CloudPhone app living in a server somewhere, and it's streaming the responses over to you so that you can see what it would be rendered as. And there's even a remote debugger. So this isn't Chrome DevTools opened on the window. This is DevTools in the browser window that is debugging the other window that is in a Chrome session somewhere in a server that's doing the rendering for CloudPhone. And it works all the same way. You've got the network tab, you've got inspect, you can go through the DOM, you can update styles. So very familiar. And I didn't want to leave with the impression that CloudPhone was the only platform here. It's actually the newest. So CloudPhone's only been around for a little over a year now. There's probably 2 others here that are quite large and worth mentioning. I'll talk a little bit about them. Opera Mini, which has been around since 2005. So they just hit their 20th anniversary, and KaiOS. So KaiOS got the title of the 3rd largest operating system in the world a couple of years ago. On flip phones in India, buoyed by Reliance Jio. It's an Indian telco that was subsidizing them heavily. They sold something like 135 million units in just a couple of years. There's actually more KaiOS users in India than there are iOS. That means there are more people with a flip phone running KaiOS in India than have an iPhone. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think tariffs and taxes are a big one. The average iPhone costs about 3 months. The cheapest iPhone costs about 3 months the average Indian salary for a median wage if you were to work 3 months straight. So they're just completely unaffordable for the vast majority of the population. Versus the Geo phone and this Nokia phone, which were, I think, roughly between around $20 US. So KaiOS has got a lot of interesting things about it. That's how I actually started. Your code runs on the device, so you're not dealing with a remote browser. All of your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript gets minified and packaged on the phone itself. That means you're hardware constrained. So in my podcast app, I downloaded album art for the thumbnails for the podcasts that are served at 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. Out of memory error, crashed the phone. I had to build a server-side component to shrink and compress them. Required to monetize with KaiOS, so you have to integrate with their service called KaiAds. They take a 70% cut of net revenue, which is quite steep. And probably the biggest reason that I found as a pain is that they have 2 versions of the OS and 2 app stores. So most of the users are on 2.5, which is based on Gecko 48 from 2016. You don't get ES6. You don't get any of the fun stuff that you might expect. No async await. They do have WebSockets and a few other things, but no WASM. There's like a whole bunch of stuff that you're going to miss when you go that far back. So a lot of fragmentation. It's quite difficult to serve this market for that reason. And they really haven't started shipping new devices in the last year or so. And that's really because they require hardware that's much closer to a smartphone. So the hardware is actually much more expensive, and with inflation has really gotten a lot worse. Opera Mini is definitely the biggest. There's no way around that. They probably have a couple 100 million active users on their platform. But it's also incredibly dated. They have not shipped an update in over 5 years to the client and 10 years to the server. It's based on Presto, which was discontinued a decade ago. You don't even have full ES5 support. And probably the biggest thing, web apps will not work. Websites, like static sites, will work fine. Web apps will really get hit by this 2.5 second execution limit. So if you do any async task, if you're doing an XHR request, if you're doing a timeout, if it goes longer than 2.5 seconds, it's terminated. They also don't do multimedia streaming, no audio, no video. So Opera Mini is really good if you're, like a basic news site. You can serve some images, some text. Not so good. And there's no app store. So the biggest issue that you're going to find here in addressing this user base is just finding the users, right? You could build a website, but how do they know to come to it? And with that, here, when I Googled flip phone questions, I found some TikTok videos. I haven't actually watched them, so I don't know what they are, but I found the screenshots of them. So answering all your questions about flip phones. What was the question? Oh, I think that one's a joke or some sort of AI video. I don't think that's a real phone.
So in the earlier example where you said the view was rendered like kind of on a server, right? Like a remote Chrome. Who actually pays for that? Is it the company subsidizing the phones, or is there like a subscription?
Yeah, so the users don't pay anything for this. It's packaged into the cost of the phone at the time it ships. So the manufacturers pay this cloud phone service to provide them on an ongoing basis. And what I haven't mentioned is the company behind this. So Cloud Phone started by the company that made the Puffin remote browser. There's not that many remote browsers out there. They started back in 2009. So they've been doing this for 15 plus years now. So they're well versed in how to handle the security and privacy considerations of having a bunch of browser sessions that live online in a remote browsing context.
That's crazy though for the cost. Like if the phone is $20, it theoretically comes with a lifetime of server processing bills. Like I don't know. That seems like how do they afford that? That's crazy.
Well, lifetime of the phone or lifetime of the service contract, not your lifetime.
Yeah.
So if you find one of these, 20 years from now and it still somehow works, then can't guarantee this will still work. Yeah, what prompted me to get started in flip phones? It was sort of accidental because I was bored. So the reason I built a podcast app for flip phones in the first place was I wanted to like a lot of people want to get one of these phones for like digital detox. I want to switch to it maybe every weekend or something. Take it camping, and my girlfriend was like, "There's no way you're gonna use this thing because it doesn't have podcasts, and you like to listen to podcasts. So like, why would you ever get this?" So then I was like, "All right, great. I'm a dev. I can figure out how to build this, right? This can't be that hard." So then I built it, and then I proceeded to not use it all that often. Oh, yeah. Let me clarify. So the limitations are based on the platform here. So Opera Mini is going to be your most, like if you're building for Opera Mini, if you're building for Opera Mini, the only thing that's going to work is going to be like a basic news website. If you're building for KaiOS, you can build a pretty rich application. It just requires a lot of intention, optimization, and testing. And then the product I'm talking about, Cloud Phone, where all the rendering happens in the server, there's very little involved here. As long as your app works on desktop Chrome and can shrink, as I mentioned, to small screens and keyboard, it should very well work on this platform with very few changes. And that's because of the servers. The servers are doing all the heavy lifting. Yeah, so the question was, what are the average revenues per app, like App Store statistics? So right now, there are no paid apps. So it is up to the app developer to monetize. The flip side to this is that because there's no payment mechanisms or anything else like that, there's actually no revenue share. So for my podcast app, I monetize through sponsorships. I have podcasters reach out to me who want to promote their podcast, and in exchange, they pay me some amount of money. It's not my full-time job, at least not at this point. At one point, I thought it might have been. It was modest, but definitely not full-time salary now. But it's definitely my highest grossing app, and I've done Android since the very beginning and had quite a bit of luck. So. Yeah, the size of feature phones in pixels. So there's two screen resolutions, QVGA, which is 240 by 320, and QQVGA, which is 128 by 160. That is the really hard size to design for. If anyone does front-end development, there's a lot of, that's where you really need to start doing some redesigns. Like you start doing marquee or slide animations on text to fit it on screen. In my app, I'll have like the grid that shows up, and the I think I have a screenshot of it here. Maybe I don't. Oh, how could I miss that? You can almost see it here. So yeah, instead of putting titles underneath the grid, I put it at the top and I marquee it over as you hover, just because 128 pixels does not go very far. Exactly. Cool. Any other questions?
How long did it take you to move on to it? Are you still working on it? Upgrading this version or anything like that?
Am I still upgrading my podcast app? And how long did it take to build? Okay, so my very first version of the app took me probably a good month or two, and that's because I had to build a backend too, because at the time there was no backend that was freely available for podcasts. So I had to build the scraper that found all the RSS feeds and checked for their updates. I got some cease and desist from Amazon because I was downloading a lot of data, looking a lot like a web crawler that maybe was doing things it shouldn't do. That took me probably about 2 months, and the first version was terrible. I had no search, I had no thumbnails. Like, it was a horrible podcast app. It got much better, and now it looks like you'd expect. It's got thumbnails, it's got search, it's got categories. But so I built that for iOS originally, and then when I built it for CloudPhone last year, maybe a week or two, not full time, just playing around with one of the phones they gave me to adapt it here. It wasn't too hard, and I'm still updating it. You know, maybe not all the time, but you know, there's new phones coming out. There's new features I want to support.
Basically, it's a web page that just has a width restriction, and then the keyboard thing as well. So theoretically, you'd be able to put something up pretty quickly, really. If you knew what the UI is going to be, you'd be able to do it quickly.
Yep, exactly. And CloudPhone was much easier. So again, when I built this first for iOS, this platform here, because the code runs on the device and it's not processed via a server, I first had out of memory errors. Like my very first day, I think I launched, I had a user reach out to be like, Joe Rogan doesn't work. And if anyone knows Joe Rogan, his episodes are like 3 hours long, and his podcast has like 1,000 episodes. His feed was like 10 megabytes, and I tried to the app tried to download the whole feed, and it crashed. It ran out of memory. So that's the kind of stuff you have to worry about for iOS. If you're on CloudPhone, because it's all being rendered on a server, you can just fetch that 10 megabyte JSON. It doesn't matter. You can fit it into memory, just like you would on a desktop. Like, you're not going to run into, unless you're doing something really insane, you're not going to run into hardware restrictions or resource constraints. Oh, sorry, in the very back. How is the WebAssembly support? That's a great question. The first podcast I was on promoting this was the WASM podcast run by Chrome for developers at Google. Full WebAssembly support like you expect in Chrome 128. The only thing we ask if you're shipping a WASM app is that you don't put cryptocurrencies in it. If you start crypto mining, you will get banned. We've had a few people try to sneak it in there to be like, oh, can we use your powerful servers to make a little bit of money and mine some crypto? Please don't. Everything else is cool. If you want to ship a game written in WASM, no problem. I built a front-end app in Rust using U. It worked fine. It's definitely not the most efficient way to serve this user base. I think the binary blob from the WASM was like 3 megabytes. That's totally fine. All right. Well, like I said, going once, going twice. Feel free to ask me questions later. And if you are interested, I don't know if we got to that point, you can connect to, I can send the slides out later. We've got a subreddit and a Discord by the same name, so r/CloudPhone. You can listen to some of what I've talked about on podcasts and some articles. And if you want one of these fun little phones and you're seriously considering developing, you can talk to me and we can have one sent over. The sad truth of it with the stupid trade war is that it costs more money to send this phone abroad because of tariffs now than it does to actually buy it. But we can send it. All right, thank you.
That's all right. Alrighty, I think that's everything. But please feel free to stick around. One of the biggest reasons we're here is for networking. So have a chat to somebody, have a chat to Matt over there with the 2 beers. Have a chat to me or somebody else, somebody you haven't met before. Grab a drink, and yeah, feel free to stick around. So thank you very much, and thank you to Tom.